Hello friends and welcome to Noble Literature classes. This is the fourth part in the course on UGC NET English Literature, and we are going to talk about British Age of Romanticism. So first let us look at the characteristics of this period. The Romantic Age in Britain was a result of three major factors which is proposed by the theorist. So number one is the American Revolution of 1776. Then we have the French Revolution of 1798. And finally, we have the Industrial Revolution in England, which happened or started during the 1770s. So many different romantic poets emerged, and we have William Wordsworth and Coleridge holding the flag of the British Romantic movement. We also have William Blake, John Keats, P.B. Shelley, and Lord Byron, etc., which we will be covering in this lecture. So, Wordsworth was only 19 years old when French Revolution erupted, and for him it was a very blissful period to be alive at this time. He has quoted it that it was a period of bliss where liberty, equality, and fraternity came to the forefront. All the other major romantic poets also, except John Keats, they also started becoming more and more political after seeing these revolutions. And Lord Byron's first speech in the House of Lords, it defended some poor weavers and the casualties also which were caused because of the Industrial Revolution. And unlike the 18th century authors or writers who criticized the medievalism because for them it suggested it is a barbaric or superstitious era in which people were very arrogant and ignorant. But for the Romantics, the Middle Ages were the age of faith, an age of idealism, and an age of adventure. They really praised those ages and they wanted to bring the good qualities of those ages back. For example, the notion of quest romance, it was taken from these medieval eras, and there are so many works including Wordsworth's Prelude, Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and also P.B. Shelley's Prometheus Unbound. They all come under this tagline of quest romances which were used in the medieval ages. The Romantic Age in England also gave rise to a new kind of literary theory. Wordsworth advocated poetry which was written in the language of the common people or the rural people. He felt that the real expression of the naked dignity of man can only be given by using this rural or this rustic language. This naked dignity of man is a concept that no matter who is being hurt, they are feeling the same pain. No matter queen is losing her child or whether it is a shepherdess who is losing her child, both of them are feeling the same agony in their hearts. So, Wordsworth was the first person who dared to use this common and unpoetical language, so-called unpoetical language. And although Wordsworth had a heightened sensitivity, but he never wanted his work to show any elevation than the common man. He wanted his language to look as if he is a man who is speaking to other men. Now, general features of his poetry include that there are so many references to nature and natural objects, intimate self-revelations of the poet. These characteristics you can find in all these early romantic poets. And we have the imagery also there which reflects a careful attention to the concrete particulars. Now let us start with the Romantic period. We have the first two writers, early Romantic writers, William Blake and Robert Burns. William Blake and Robert Burns are two different kind of people. Blake was a mystic. He used to live in some another kind of world, an altogether different world. And he was also a painter, he was also an engraver who used to cut out these woodworks. And Robert Burns, on the other hand, he was a Scottish peasant poet. He was a Scottish poet. He is also known as the national poet of Scotland or the father of Scottish poetry. So Robert Burns was a Scottish peasant poet who achieved greater fame than uh, William Blake. Now, William Blake, 1757 to 1827, he broke the neoclassicism as early as 1789 with his simple lyrical work, which was known as uh, Lyrics of Innocence, or you can say Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. Songs of Innocence was produced in 1789. From 1789 to 90, it took around 2 years, and Songs of Experience came 4 years later in 1794. William Blake, he continued in the romantic passion of his with his complex long poems and his prophetic works, where he used to give out direct lessons to people, direct morals. And these were very difficult poems to read because he used some private mythology of his. But Songs of Innocence and Experience is a pretty simple work. It is meant for study by children, to be studied by children. And these short poems, for these short poems, Blake also engraved the text, and it also accompanied some drawings on the copper plates. And these simple and imaginative lyrics show that William Blake had a compassion for the poor and also a very big hatred for the repressive or the high classes. The next work of William Blake is The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, 1790 to 93. It attacks the sexual and social morality which was interpreted or given to people by these organized religions like Christianity. It is because this these interpretations of what morality should be, how you should live a social life, how you should live your sexual life, these rules which are given by these churches or religious organization, according to William Blake, these rules restrained the creative energy and the genius of people. The section Proverbs of Hell is a famous section, a famous extract or famous work in this Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Next work we have is the Book of Urizen, Urizen, 1794. It is a complex poem, and the fall of man is talked about here, and it uses Blake's private mythology. It is very hard to determine his mythology because most or many of the characters which he uses of the ancient time, those characters cannot be deciphered by people. So in this work, Urizen means reason, Los means imagination, and Orc it means libido, Libido, libido or the sexual energy. Next work of William Blake we have The Four Zoas, Zoas. It was written from 1797 to 1804. It is an epic work by William Blake which consisted of 3600 lines, and it tells about the fall and restoration of the eternal man. Eternal man is a concept given by William Blake. Next poet, or the more famous poet among these two, is Robert Burns from 1759 to 96. He started his work as a folk rhymer. He used to rhyme these folk tales of Scotland in the same dialect of Scottish, in the same Scottish dialect. And therefore, Burns became increasingly sophisticated, and therefore he started producing biting satires and songs of love, nature, and of rural life. His satires include Holy Willie's Prayer, HOLYWILLIE, Willie apostrophe S, Holy Willie's Prayer, then address to the Unco Guid, UNCOGUID. The next satire is the Holy Fair, the Holy Fair. These are directed at religious Hippocrates and strict Calvinist people. Next we have some songs by Robert Burns, and these are more admired than the satires. They include the Highland Mary, HIGHLAND MARY, and also a Red Rose. You can also make a reference over here. In the early 20th century, the famous writer Gertrude Stein, GERTRUDE, Gertrude STEINE. So Gertrude Stein, she wrote a famous line, "A rose is a rose is a rose is a rose." And it is a very famous line which you can relate to here also. Just Google the term rose is a rose is a rose is a rose. In this line, rose, the first rose is a name of a lady, Rose. Then rose is a rose means that she is shy or she is getting blushing. So something like that. You can just Google the entire meaning on the internet. It is a very famous sentence. Next song of Robert Burns, we have Brewed a Peck of Maut, M-A-U-T. And also his another democratic lyric we have is A man is a man for all that. Then we have some longer poems by Robert Burns like Tam o' Shanter, T-A-M O apostrophe S, like it is Tam of Shanter, S-H-A-N-T-E-R. It is a jovial narrative of a drunken adventure. Another longer poem by Robert Burns is The Cotter's Saturday Night, the C-O-T-T-E-R, Cotter's Saturday Night. It shows the affectionate picture of the rural life. Next, let us come to William Wordsworth and let us see how he revolutionized the theory of poetry. So, William Wordsworth from 1770 to 1850, he found the poetry of the neoclassical period as very artificial and it had too much rhetoric being used in the language. Rhetoric means various literary devices which we use, like assonance, alliteration, rhyming patterns, iambic pentameter, that meter. So he did not want to use all these rhetoric devices, and he just wanted the language to be of the common people or of the rustic or the rural people. So he felt that this kind of language, it restrained the expression of true emotions of somebody, because not everybody can understand that language and not everybody can speak that language. Therefore he felt that this language was repressing the imagination of people, and his theories changed the face of poetry forever. We have the famous work Lyrical Ballads. He and his friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge, they conceived this volume as an experiment in poetry to determine how far the language of conversation in the middle and lower classes of society can be adapted to the purposes of poetic pleasure. They wanted to check out what is the extent to which we can raise the level of this low society poetry so that it looks beautiful and it gives pleasure to the reader. Now there is a great theory of Wordsworth, the famous sentence that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Now in the later volume of his, in the later preface to this volume, Wordsworth wrote that the passions exist in the purest form in the simple rural life, and therefore in his new kind of poetry which he is publishing, the humble activities of ordinary people can serve as the poetic themes of his works. Now let me tell you that William Wordsworth never wanted to justify himself. He was never in favor of giving explanations to people, but he had to give it because he was the first person to do this kind of social or literary experiment, and and he received a huge criticism in those days. Therefore, in order to answer all that kind of criticism, because if you know, there was this Blackwoods magazine which used to criticize all these early romantic people, and the Quarterly magazine also used to criticize all these people. So in order to justify this new kind, he did not justify himself, he was only justifying the writing style which he had created. He thought that this is the style which will raise the level of humanity, because then only people will be able to understand each other, because he felt that the aristocrats cannot understand the rural folk and the rural folk are unable to understand the aristocrats. So if we change the language of poetry, maybe we can do something. Now coming back, he was a poet of nature and the people. We see that his genius of simple taste loved his native district, which is the Lake District, and that Lake District was situated in the northwest England. There he lived with the yeoman farmers, Yeoman, yeoman farmers, and also the shepherds which were present there. So his greatest poem is The Prelude, which is a massive blank verse autobiography about his poetic mind or his poetic thoughts. And this prelude, it was revised for about a 50 years period, and then it was published only a few months before his death in 1850. Wordsworth also died in 1850, and a few months before that his greatest work was published. Then we have the nature poems of Wordsworth. More readers are moved by these simple lyrics because here they can understand actually this language. It is an easy language. So even children are able to sometimes understand what the poet is trying to say. And these nature poems, you will find that they describe even simple subjects like a field of flowers, of daffodil flowers. And also, he is talking about some unexpected rainbow which emerged without a rain. And also, a sunny morning. Also, the sunny morning which happened after a stormy night. These are the topics which he chose. So, very simple kind of topics were chosen by him. And also, we have next is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He was a poet, a critic, and a visionary. People consider him as one of the most learned people among these early romantics because he knew 5 different languages, more than 5. He knew French, Latin, German, uh, Greek, English, he already knew. So he knew so many different languages and he studied the literatures of those languages. He borrowed the ideas mainly from the German philosophers and then he also wrote these things. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he was a collaborator with Wordsworth on the lyrical ballads, but more importantly, he defended the new approach of poetry with his own critical work, which is Biographia Literaria. Biographia Literaria was published in 1817. It was a kind of his own autobiography which defended his ways, the ways in which he was writing. So Coleridge was an innovative poet who used to write strange poems about the supernatural as well as the personal meditations. These personal meditations of Coleridge were known as conversation poems. Now let me tell you something about their collaboration, which is the lyrical ballads. When Coleridge met Wordsworth in the Lake District of England, there they both decided that why not do a little experiment with this poetry. So they said that in order to prove this theory of theirs, the romantic theory of language, what they decided is that one person among them will use the normal or the everyday day-to-day objects and he will try to make them look as if they are very supernatural or something very great, and the other person, he will take the great phenomena or the ancient medieval phenomena, those supernatural elements, and he will try to simplify those elements for the common people or the rural people to understand. So both of them decided to take these two roles. Wordsworth took the first task of defamiliarizing the everyday common objects and making them look as supernatural, and Coleridge took the task of taking these supernatural elements and concepts and myths and these concepts and making them look like the normal things and making them understand to the normal people. Now both of them were supposed to give equal amount of poems in that work, like it was supposed to be a 50-50 partnership. But what it turns out is that in the first edition of Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1798, out of the 23 poems, only 4 were given by Coleridge. And the 4 of them are the Foster Mother's Tale, and then we have the Dungeon, then we have the Nightingale, which was written in the April of 1798, and the famous one, The Rime of Ancient Mariner. You can also note down some of Wordsworth's famous poems. We Are 7, then Anecdote for Fathers, then the Nightingale, Nightingale was by Coleridge. Then we have the Idiot Boy, or then we have the Mad Mother, then we have lines written about Tintern Abbey. So, in the second edition of Lyrical Ballads, which came in 2 years after it, that is 1800, Coleridge did not produce any new works. Only his older work, which was Love, the name of the poem is Love, it was only published in that work. And this version includes some new poems of Wordsworth, that is Lucy Gray and lines written on a tablet in a school. Then the Matthew poems, or you can hashtag the 2 April mornings. Another work of Wordsworth in the second edition is The Fountain, comma, a conversation. And also Michael, comma, a pastoral. So if you see, Wordsworth used to write on these very common people, very common subjects, which used to be mocked at by the early 18th century people. So now let's come back to Coleridge and see what he has contributed to the literature. First we have his supernatural poems. First one is Kubla Khan, which was given in 1816. It came out in 1816. It is an incomplete work. Now, it is his most crowning achievement, and it is a fragment tale because the later half he forgot what was to write in that work. I'll tell you the tale. He was sitting and having opium and dreaming in the day, and then he was before dreaming that he was reading this great tale of Samuel Purchas. I already told you in the previous lecture one. Samuel Purchas wrote the famous book Around the World in 80 Days. So he was reading that and he fell asleep on opium, and he had this great dream about a fantastic city of a great ruler, Kubla Khan. So just as he woke up from the dream, he woke up and he started writing frivolously whatever he remembered about that dream. It was a great inspiring dream for him. But suddenly, as he is writing, a stranger comes in, a visitor, and he disturbs him, and after that he cannot recollect what to write in that poem. So Kubla Khan remained unfinished after that. Now, next work we have is The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. As I told you, it was published in the first volume of the Lyrical Ballads. It is a parable of a sailor's crime against nature. Parable means a simple story with a motive or a moral to give. So there is a sailor and he kills this bird, albatross. And what happens is he thinks that it is a simple crime. It is not a crime at all. He has just killed a bird for no reason and nothing will happen. But as it happens is their boat stops riding in the sea, and the winds actually stop, so the boat also stops sailing, and they are stuck there in the middle of that vast ocean in the sea, and all their food is dried up. They eat everything, they drink all the water they had, and then they are thirsty and they are dying over there in the middle of that ocean. And all this happens just because that sailor killed an albatross without any reason. So Coleridge has set this poem in the Middle Ages and in some unknown seas near Antarctica, and that is how Coleridge is able to make us or make the reader believe in his narrative. In his narrative, it looks credible, and this is where he introduces his concept of the willing suspension of disbelief. This concept is that some of us, we believe something. We all are rational people and we have our thoughts in us, rational thoughts, but sometimes we become orthodox and we believe that if we kick a dog, something bad is going to happen to us. We believe in that act of karma. So that believing in that act of karma, while knowing that there is no existing proof to prove that act of karma, is known as the willing suspension of disbelief. I have talked about all these concepts in the literary theory and criticism section, so please go and check that out. Now, the next work we have is Christabel. It is an unfinished tale of a witch. Her name is Geraldine. She is trying to enter the life of a beautiful maiden, Christabel. Christabel is a maiden. Maiden used to be these virgin or unmarried girls in the early medieval eras. So, Geraldine is trying to enter the life of Christabel and trying to harm her, and also she's even reached a point of entering her lover's body. The next kind of poems that Coleridge wrote were conversation poems. These were quite descriptive and highly personal poems in a form which was originated and perfected by Coleridge himself. These were realistic imagery of rural life, and we find that works are Frost at Midnight and this lime tree bower my prison. This lime tree, Bower, bower my prison. Then we also have his famous literary work, which is Biographia Literaria, which was published in 1817. It is his most important work in prose, and it contains his autobiography and his literary criticism, also his philosophy. And there is this section on the superiority of imagination over simple logic in this work. Here he also analyzes some works by Shakespeare and Wordsworth. He also gave many lectures on Shakespeare, etc. And as he was a very renowned person, so more than his works, his own personality was more famous among those people. And he also inspired many other writers. Now, the next writer we have is Lord Byron, or you can say his full name, George Gordon, Lord Byron, 1788 to 1824. He was more neoclassical than being romantic. He belonged to an aristocratic family and he was a proud and mysterious young guy. And he wrote a large and remarkably different kinds of works especially in the poetry. So we have his satires first of all. His satires, the famous one is English Bards and Scotch Reviewers, 1808. It attacks the poetry of Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Robert Southey. He attacks it using the heroic couplets of Alexander Pope. Not exact couplets used by him, but the style of Alexander Pope. Next we have is The Vision of Judgment, 1822. Here he criticizes these three poets. Next we have his travelogues, his poems which he wrote during his travels. So first one we have is Childe Harold's Pilgrimage, Childe Harold'. Then Pilgrimage, 1809 to 1817. It establishes the Byronic hero. It is a famous concept. A Byronic hero is a moody and a cynical character. Cynical means somebody who does not trust anybody. Now this Byronic hero, he is traveling throughout Europe. He hates the society, and we can also see it in the third and the fourth cantos of this work. Next work we have is Manfred, a dramatic poem, 1816 to 17. This is a closet drama. Closet dramas are those dramas which are not meant to be performed on a stage, but only to be read by a reader when he is alone. So it is a closet drama, Manfred, a dramatic poem, 1816 to 17. In this one we have again a young Byronic hero with a dark secret of forbidden love. And it has been compared with Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. Next work of him, the most famous one, is Don Juan, Donjuan. It is an unfinished masterpiece and it has 16 completed cantos about a comic epic which is unsurpassed in English literature because it presents this glorious mixture of realism. Realism is combined with romantic elements and also emotions and sentiments. And all these things are given life by the buffoonery or the ridiculous and amusing behavior of these characters. So here we have these two major characters, the legendary lover, which is Don Juan, and then the gossipy and the very wise narrator who uses these various jokes and these outrageous rhymes, and also he tries to look at the human society interesting. And all this work is written in the Ottawa Rima stanza. This anti-romantic work is dedicatedly meant to attack Wordsworth, Coleridge, and Robert Southey because because Lord Byron believed that these were very dull and still ambitious people. But nevertheless, of his views about these poets, Lord Byron was a great man. He supported all the Greeks against their war for independence from the Turkish people. You must know that the Turks, they had captured the Greek cities, and in order to free that place, people were fighting, the revolutionaries were fighting, and Lord Byron himself went to Greece with some money and medical supplies, and he died there only in 1823. So such activities made him a hero in Europe, where his poetry is very much praised. So his poetry is not praised because of his poetic qualities, but much more because he himself was this Byronic hero which he invented. So next writer we have is P.B. Shelley. He was a poet as well as a political rebel. The life and poetry of the aristocratic Percy Bysshe Shelley was marked by the revolutionary fervor and radical idealism which was combined with his great literary talents. Now, P.B. Shelley lived from 1792 to 1822, and no other English poet can match him for the pure lyric genius which he was. And although he lived only up till the age of 29 years, he drowned actually in a river. But Shelley accomplished much and more pamphlets on the cause of the Irish freedom. If you know, Shelley also wrote a great elegy on the death of John Keats, which was titled Adonais. We'll talk about it. So, he talked about the Irish freedom movement in his verse drama Prometheus Unbound, the supreme expression in literature about the perfectibility of the human race. And also, the Platonic idealism here provides the intellectual background for many of his next poems. Let us look at some of his works. We have Queen Mab 1813. It is a visionary poem that presents some of Shelley's most revolutionary ideas, his dislikes for the tyrannical nature of the higher societies and the orthodox Christianity also. Then we have his next work, Alastor 1815. It is a blank verse allegory about the poet's quest for the ideal woman. Here we see that it is the Shelley's first major poem. Next work we have is Mont Blanc and the Hymn to the Intellectual Beauty. Both were published in 1816. These are idealistic companion poems, and in these Shelley attempts to convey an idea of the ultimate being or the power of the entire universe. Next work we have is Ode to the West Wind, a very famous work in 1819. It depicts the dual nature of the West Wind. West Wind acts both as a destroyer and also the preserver. It destroys what is useless, what is going to be lifeless, and it preserves the nature by bringing the seeds which give life to that land. It also blows away the dead leaves, so if you need to know. Next we have To a Skylark in 1820. Skylark is a bird. So Shelley's most popular work is To a Skylark. Most popular lyric is To a Skylark, and it uses the ingenious imagery to convey the spirit of songbird, and also it is meant to compare its role of the skylark to the role of the poet. Next work we have Adonais 1821. It is, as I told you, an pastoral elegy on the death of John Keats. It adapts the myth of Adonais' death in celebrating Keats' death or Keats' rebirth into an ideal Platonic world. He believes that if you know John Keats, he was a very reserved person. He was a diseased person also. He used to stay ill all the time. So John Keats used to write all these works about the ancient works. He used to translate the ancients. And in the Adonais work, P.B. Shelley manages to bring all the friends of John Keats at his funeral. It is an imaginary funeral in this poem, and here so many friends of him are collected, and so many of the previous or the past poets, the great ancient poets, have also collected in order to pay regards to John Keats. Next work we have is Prometheus Unbound in 1818. It is Shelley's masterpiece, a lyric drama in 4 acts. It uses the myth of the chained titan in order to portray the ultimate resistance to tyranny, and also it leads to the idea of the perfect world. Now, because of all these various qualities and because of the literary works of Shelley, if you want to see, I have already given a video on John Keats and P.B. Shelley separately for their literary criticism. You can go and have a look at that. Next we have is John Keats. John Keats and Shelley were frenemies, Frenemies, that they were friend enemies, literary enemies, but actually they were real life friends. So they used to write these works and they used to criticize each other's work. But the quarterly magazines and all these magazines, they used to criticize both their works collectively, so they were kind of friends also. So John Keats, he only died at the age of 25 after a brief poetic career. He lived from 1795 to 1821, and there was this effortless magic of phrase that he had, and also the styles of poetics which he used, and a wide range of sympathetic understanding that he had. It was very much praised by the later critics. Now, 1819 is associated or called as the year of miracles for John Keats because, despite his serious illness and an unresolved love affair, Keats wrote his six great odes and also the work The Eve of Saint Agnes, and also a group of excellent sonnets in 9 marvelous months. So these are known as the years. This is 1819 is known as the year of miracle. The sonnets which he wrote are he wrote highly personal sonnets which included some of the great ones like On Seeing the Elgin Marbles, Elgin Marbles. Then the next one is On First Looking into Chapman's Homer. It conveys his joy when he first tried to conceive or experience art. Now we have his famous long poem Endymion, 1817. It is remembered for the famous line, A thing of beauty is a joy forever, and it is also remembered because this poem is considered as the death or the reason behind the death of Keats, because this poem received huge criticism by the famous magazines of those times like the Blackwood magazine, the Quarterly Review, the One More Review was there. So all these magazines criticized Keats very harshly, and because of that Keats died. He could not recover from his illness. And Shelley also, in his famous work Adonais, he also mentions these villains, that the soul of Keats will live forever, but these magazines, the people who are writing these criticism of Keats, they will die a very bad death. So John Keats wrote this famous Endymion, 1817. Then another work, The Eve of Saint Agnes, as I told you, in 1819. It is a narrative in Spenserian stanzas, and this narrative, it is written in unusually delicate and sensuous imagery. Then we have the great odes, the six great odes which he wrote in 1819. These odes show Keats' remarkable maturity as a poet and his use of all his senses in his concrete imagery. And also this here he uses his famous negative capability to write things. Now Keats, in his various letters to his father and to his two brothers, he mentions that Wordsworth and Shakespeare are incomparable because Wordsworth is much lesser poet than Shakespeare. Shakespeare has this negative capability and Wordsworth has this egotistical sublime. So I have mentioned all these things in the literary criticism part. You can please go there and have this view. So these six great odes are Ode to Psyche. In this one, a mortal is there who wins a place on the Mount Olympus. Now, Psyche is a person who is a man like some normal man. He is able to win this place at Mount Olympus, but Mount Olympus does not have any temple. Now, Keats wants to be the priest of this temple and build this temple for Psyche. Next, we have the Ode to a Nightingale. Listening in darkness to the notes of a nightingale, Keats wishes to blend with the bird and to leave this sad and forever changing earth. Next, we have Ode on a Grecian Urn. Keats here is comforted by the realization that the ideal art is truth and that art is permanent. Here we have the famous lines, truth is beauty and beauty is truth, beauty. That whatever is true, that is beautiful, and whatever is beautiful has to be true. Then we have another ode, Ode on Melancholy. It says that do not seek to escape melancholy by poison, indulge in melancholy and glute, that is completely dissolve yourself in it, and then it will be as beautiful as the beauty itself. Next ode we have is Ode on Indolence. This is a fanciful poem which depicts the three allegorical figures which circle before the poet. What are these three figures? Ambition, love, and poetry. In the Ode on Indolence, Keats says that it is impossible to achieve all these three things at the same time or by the single person. Either a person will he will get his ambitions, his personal desires fulfilled, or he will be able to find true love, or either he will be able to write good poetry. He can only do one of these three things. And then we have his Ode to Autumn, in which he gloriously evokes the fall season or the winter season and it also shows some of Keats' finest nature imagery. Now do remember that Ode on Indolence was not published along with these poems. It was published in 1848, much later after his death. Now let us look at the prose writers of the Romantic period. Now, although poetry was the most important literary medium of the Romantic period, but still an innovation in the prose or personal essay was very significant. And the personal essay, it introduces us to De Quincey, Hazlitt and Charles Lamb. These people abandoned the traditions of the formal essays and they tried to explore new ways. This new ways included a more impressionistic and less structured essay which disclosed more of the personality of the writer. First person we have is Thomas De Quincey from 1785 to 1859. His famous work is Confessions of an English Opium Eater, 1821. It is written in a sensuous, imaginative style, revealing his addiction in the intimate details. So Thomas De Quincey, just like Coleridge, was also an opium eater. Literary criticism is also there about Thomas De Quincey. He wrote this famous The Poetry of Pope work. In this, De Quincey distinguished between the literature of knowledge from the literature of the power. Literature of knowledge is which teaches us, and literature of power is which moves the emotions. Now his essay is there on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth. This essay explains one of Shakespeare's great subtleties of staging or staging his plays, because the audience is skillfully returned to the real world after a horrendous murder scene by Shakespeare. Here he talks about the great murder scene in the Macbeth, how Shakespeare manages to send his audience home still with praise for him. Next writer we have is William Hazlitt, 1778 to 1830. Now, along with Coleridge, he was considered one of the most important literary critics of the day. Hazlitt, The Characters of Shakespeare's Play, his famous work, The Characters of Shakespeare's Plays, it was very significant. And also another work is Essays on Elizabethan Playwrights. Another work is My First Acquaintance with Poets. It talks about when Hazlitt met Wordsworth and Coleridge. Then another work is on Going on a Journey. Another work, it is accompanied by The Fight, The Fight, F-I-G-H-T. The Fight, it talks about a brutal fight, a bare knuckle joust of William Hazlitt, and it appeared first in the collections which were entitled as Table Talk. So these table talk essays were famous for the narrative details which they had. Next writer we have is Charles Lamb, 1775 to 1834. He was the greatest of the personal essayists, and he was praised for his lucid style, emotional warmth, and the wry sense of humor. And the famous work is Essays of Elia, E-L-I-A, 1823 to 33. And this 2-volume collection of Charles Lamb's work includes The Two Races of Men, one work in which we have borrowers and lenders, and then the next work is Poor Relations. In this we see a keen insight into family relationship. Also another work is there in Essays of Elia, Old China. It is a nostalgic look at younger or poorer days when he could afford only the second balcony seats of the theatre. He believed that those days were very good. So next we have some major novelists of this time, Jane Austen and Sir Walter Scott. The novels of the Romantic period fall into the four general categories: the Gothic romances, the novel of purpose, the novel of manners, and the historical novels. So, Gothic romances are Mrs. Anne Radcliffe, they were written by Anne Radcliffe. The novel of purpose were written by William Godwin, and William Godwin's work is Caleb Williams, Caleb Williams. Then novel of manners is Jane Austen, were written by Jane Austen, and the historical novels were popularized by Sir Walter Scott. So the first writer we have is Jane Austen, 1775 to 1817. She was the greatest novelist of this period, and when everybody was writing romantic poetry, she transcends the genre novel of manners, which is concerned with the manners and customs of a specific social class. And it is novel of manners talks about her gentle but satirical wits and the clarity of her insights into human nature. And it also shows her lucid and delicately balanced style. So Jane Austen has given three major works, although she has given so many works. First one is Sense and Sensibility, published 1811. It satirizes the sentimental traditions of love as displayed by the emotional heroine Marianne. Next work is Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813. It features her best loved character Elizabeth Bennet, whom Jane Austen herself called as a delightful creature as ever appeared in print. So the efforts of the doughty Mrs. Bennet are there in this Pride and Prejudice work. Mrs. Bennet tries to marry her daughter Elizabeth to a rich or a wealthy person, and she does all that she can to do that. And Emma is there, another work published in 1815. It has two great comic creations, Mr. Woodhouse and Miss Bates. Emma is said to be the most profound of Jane Austen's characterizations. Next writer is Sir Walter Scott, 1771 to 1832. Scott stopped writing poetry in 1814, and because he was always deep in his past, so he began writing historical fiction. And that historical fiction was connected to his own life, his own thoughts, therefore it became very famous. And the best of his so-called Waverley novels. He wrote these so many Waverley novels, and he never revealed who the writer was until at a later stage when he became famous. So the Waverley novels are The Antiquary, which was published in late 18th century. Then we have Old Mortality. Old Mortality talks about the era of the Glorious Revolution, when we know that William of Orange took the crown. Then we have The Heart of Midlothian. It talks about the age of Queen Anne. Then we have Ivanhoe, the famous work which is published in 1819. It talks about the time of Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart was a 12th century great person who ruled England and who preserved the culture of 1066 to 11. I don't remember the exact dates, but he preserved the culture of that 12th century. So next work is Kenilworth, Kenilworth. It talks about the court of Queen Elizabeth. And then we have Quentin Durward, Quentin Durward. It talks about the period of Louis XIV. Now we have his famous characters also, like his readers found his heroes and heroines as uninteresting and bland, but the villains and the minor characters are richly drawn. He was particularly adept at creating lively characters from the lower classes. So that was the Romantic Age for you, friends. And if you liked this video, you can go and hit the like button and support me or whatever. Subscribe this channel, share this channel. And in the next lecture, we will be doing Victorian Age. We will be starting with the age of Queen Victoria. And thank you for watching this video and have a very nice day.